Okay, good morning, folks. For those of you on the call that do not know me, my name is Rob Buxton. I'm the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the state of New Hampshire. We are privileged to pull this call together with our partners in DES as we talk about all things drought management here in the state of New Hampshire. I'm going to turn the call directly over to Dr. Mary Stampone, who's going to talk to us about drought description, conditions, and outlook. So, Mary, the call is yours.
Thank you. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Absolutely, feel free.
All right. So to start us off, I thought I'd kind of provide a sort of a high level overview of drought in this state. I believe National Weather Service folks are on the call here so they can answer some more specific forecast type questions. But to start off, I just want to show the time series of drought in occurrence and intensity across the state and focusing in on kind of the past decade or so, going back to 2015, we see this pattern of frequent warm season droughts that begin kind of the late spring to mid-summer onset. And we can break drought down into, just water inputs, water outputs. And what we see going into the drought season, or the warm season, sorry, going into the warm season, we know water outputs are going to increase, right? We have stronger sunlight, warmer temperatures. So for every degree of Fahrenheit increase in temperature, we see on average 4% increase in the amount of moisture the air can hold, right? Plants are growing, we're using more water. And so all of those outputs we know are going to increase during that warm season. But we don't know what the inputs are going to be, primarily from precipitation. Going into any summer, we don't know how much precipitation we're going to get or when we're going to get it. So if we kind of fast forward here to this summer, we actually started off wet. So this graph is showing you precipitation depicted as the standardized precipitation index. So this is a normalized precipitation product that it doesn't show the amount, but it shows you how far above or below normal that we're getting. The blue categories are when we're wetter than normal. And then, of course, the dry categories correspond with the drought monitor categories. And so going into this summer, we were actually quite wet from May into June. But by the end of June, going into July, things switched. So we had plenty of water to start with, which might make us think that, oh, we're probably not going to see drought development this summer. But because midway through, we flipped and moved into a lower than average precipitation. This left us vulnerable to drought development again later in that season. And so if we add on the kind of the output showing you output from the evaporative demand index. So this is another standardized indice that's accounting for not just temperature. So this is the evaporative demand of the atmosphere that accounts for sunlight, temperature, humidity, and wind, right? Later in the summer, all right, we saw with that drying, all right, less cloud cover, warmer temperatures, less humidity, and we saw that increase in the evaporative demand that coincided with drying. And so the dryness starts with a lack of rainfall, but then the drought conditions and the conditions actually on the ground intensify with that increased evaporative demand that we saw later in the summer. All right, and so to kind of show the spatial distribution of this from the summer, so this is, again, the standardized precipitation index mapped on the left. The eddy evaporative demand is on the right. So this is starting off at the end of June. All conditions were normal by the end of June. But as we put this into motion, right, we can see that the lack of precipitation in July, we started to again see the precipitation deficits growing until we get to mid-August, where on the right, we see that eddy index kick up into some of those extreme dry categories. And again, this particular map here, so this is August 13th, so mid-August, this coincides with that big heat wave we had in the middle of August where we saw some very extreme temperatures. So again, the warmer we get, the more that atmospheric demand requires water from the surface. On the left, we see with the SPI, SPI, we're not getting that water. And so that really initiated that dryness that kind of started to develop in July, intensified that into drought conditions, which were introduced in mid-August. And then, of course, going forward, here we are, we see that intensify through the month of September, and forwarding to now. Again, the peak of that dryness is occurring at about this point in the year. So these maps are from about a year ago, not a year ago, I'm sorry, a week ago. And really the intense conditions are there in the middle of the state. But one other thing to notice here with the Eddy index on the right, so we're still dry, and this is of course not accounting for last week's rainfall. But with the Eddy index, right, as we're moving into the colder season, we're starting to see that atmospheric or environmental demand for water to decrease. And so with the sun is lower, we're not getting as much sunlight, temperatures are cooling a bit, especially at night. We should start to see some surface improvements going forward into the cold season, right? And so at this point, topsoil should be seeing some improvements as vegetation is kind of winding down, cooler nights, it's able to retain more of that dew overnight. When we do get rain, all right, that beneficial rain can help to address shortfalls in stream flow. But while we're cooling and that output is now declining, we still need more input, right? We're going to need more rain, because without more rain, some of these improvements that we saw with the last bit of rain are going to diminish. So we need more rain to address the deficits in soil moisture as we get deeper into the ground, and of course long-term shortfalls in stream flow, and of course groundwater, which is going to take a little while to respond to any kind of input in surface moisture. And so kind of where we are with rainfall. So this is accumulated precipitation from April 1st that's being shown as a departure. So how far above or below our average we are. And for kind of southern and western parts of the state, we see for Keene, Concord, and Nashua. With that rain last week, we're kind of hovering around normal. But we still have some fairly large precipitation deficits to recover from across the areas that are experiencing the most intense drought conditions at the moment. And so looking ahead, conditions really are not favorable for too much improvement in the short term. Longer term outlooks do call for warmer than average seasonal temperatures. So we are getting cooler, but we are seasonably warm for this time of year, and we don't have too much precipitation in the forecast over the near term. So we really do need to see some precipitation to have appreciable improvements in drought conditions. And so with the seasonal outlook going into December, we are looking at some improvements across the state, again, likely due to, and that's just seasonal cooling that we expect for this time of year. But to really see drought removal, we are going to need some more precipitation. And it is likely that some of the areas that are experiencing the most intense drought conditions will see some drought persist, even with improvements into the cold season. And so I will stop there with my summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. We're going to actually hold questions for everybody till the end. And I would like to actually turn the call over to Assistant Director of the Water Division, Ted Deers, and have Ted give us an update on resourcing and messaging. Ted, you're muted, my friend.
Thank you. Most people prefer it that way. Can you see my slides okay?
We can.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Mary, for getting us up to date. I'm going to spend just a little time talking about some of the impacts we're seeing across the state. This will tee up other folks to come afterwards and to be able to tell, kind of what they're seeing from their perspectives. So this is going to go relatively quickly, but just want to identify kind of what our concerns are from the Department of Environmental Services. And a lot of it will be focused on drinking water because obviously that is the important piece. This is a cast of thousands, or at least tens, that have input into this data that makes this presentation, and especially shout out to Kelsey Vaughn, who's our Water Conservation Program Coordinator. And she's really fantastic at kind of assembling this information and then creating messaging out of it. And I'll appreciate all of her help. Looking at stream flow, this is really taking representative gauges from across the state, looking at different regions, essentially taking these are various different gauges, stream gauges that have minimally affected by things like dam releases, things like that. And you can see that for most of the summer, we were very, very, very low until we had a little blip over the last week, which was great. And that's unfortunately, you can see that while that went up steeply, it is also tailing off relatively steeply. And so this time of year, as Mary suggested, it's getting a little bit easier to retain water, but still pretty rough out there. This is a measurement we use for a statistical measurement called 7Q10, which is the lowest 7 days of flow on a 10-year basis. And we use this measurement to understand how well waters can assimilate waste. And so it's a key message, that's a key sort of statistic about how you make sure that all the waste that's going into a river can be assimilated, can be diluted, and not impact, fish and other aquatic creatures. So what we're seeing before last week is that many of these sites were actually below 7Q10. Right now, pretty much everything is at or above, which is great. We're hoping that can be maintained through this through the winter as again flows start to the impacts of temperature and evaporation start to mitigate. Again, this is some of that same interesting data showing that we have how low below most years. But I think that this is nice. It lines up for those of you who experienced the drought in 2016. All the indicators that we have across the board generally focus on, or generally point to, the fact that 2016 is very much like this year. So that was a deep drought. It had lasting impacts into the following winter. And what we're seeing right now looks somewhat similar to that. The last, you can see that little rainstorm we helped a lot last week. You can see the difference between the gauges, how low they were in the streams last week versus after the rainstorm. Again, those are the kinds of freshets that are really needed for us to gain back any of the losses that we've had. This is a view of the Lamprey River. We have an in-stream flow program that does flow augmentation from dam releases to help reset the ecological status of these various rivers. And this is really to help fish and other aquatic creatures. And you can see that we did some dam releases. That's these blue lines. And you can see that the rainstorm last week looked very much like that. So I think that this is exactly the kinds of events we need to try to help reset the clock, but we still are very, very, very much below what we consider to be those flows which are going to be impactful on aquatic creatures. So this is, again, this is a rough time for those critters. And that's not just the Lamprey. We see the Souhegan River, the Cold River, and the Warner River, the other rivers that we have these in-stream flow programs on, that all got sort of a natural reset from the storm, but are all sort of right at the edge of being where we have strong concerns about the health of those rivers. Just want to point this out. If you go to the DES website, we have a really great environmental dashboard. And this is the kind of graph that you can grab. It's a little friendlier on the eye than a lot of the other hydrology products that are out there. And it really helps you to understand kind of where we're at relative to other flows historically for this particular time of year. So I encourage you to explore that as well as explore the other parts of our environmental dashboard that kind of give a broad overview of what's going on with the health of New Hampshire's waters. We've suffered from a lot of low lake levels over the last few weeks as our lakes have really dropped. And I'll show Winnipesaukee here in a second, but many of the lakes, the big lakes around the state are at or below their record lows for this particular time of year. Again, that rainstorm helped. It popped a lot of lakes up a couple of inches, but still you can see Newfound, 21 inches below full pool, and Sunapee again over 1.5 feet. So, you'll see some of the messaging as we get to the end here, but this is part of that messaging is that we really do need, if people want to get their boats out, now's the time to do it. The other thing that I just would note is there's going to be a press release that may be already out about the fall drawdown schedule. You may realize that there's some couple dozens of lakes around the state in which we drop those levels of the lake during the fall period. This is to help with any particular ice damage that occur on the shoreline or on shoreline structures and allow for people to repair those structures. So that schedule has been released or will be released very soon. And what you're going to see in there is that many of those, while we put the dates out, they may be somewhat delayed simply because the lakes are already so low. So that's something to keep an eye on, and will be available to answer questions if people have them about those drawdowns and the timing of those. It's going to be a little bit variable simply because of the conditions we're currently experiencing. Here's Lake Winnipesaukee. You can see at this top curve, the bottom line that goes along here is sort of that historic low. And you can see that in this summer, this is the red line, which is this summer, is that we dropped actually below historic lows for this particular time of year. And we're flirting with them kind of on a daily basis. This is that precipitation deficit that Mary was talking about. And you can see that continues to grow. And you can see that the inflow into the lake is extremely small. You see that little blip. And so we're keeping a very small discharge, essentially a minimum discharge at Lakeport. And hopefully we can maintain that as we head into winter. I'm not going to talk about fires. I think Steve Sherman probably will, but just note that it's a heck of a fire season, and certainly compares to other drought years that we've had. Point out, 2020 was another drought year, and we're significantly further along on fires than we were then. There's other folks who can talk about agriculture, but it's brutal out there, and certainly seeing some damage to trees, fruit drop. Grass growth is challenging, which means that forage is going to be tough. So I think that there's other people that are going to talk about that afterwards, but just put that on people's radar screens because that kind of flows into some of the messaging that we'll talk about. Groundwater is the challenge. Really, when you think about what Mary talked about surface waters recovering a little bit because of the change in weather and change of season, that doesn't really soak into the ground. And so what we're seeing is over the course of the summer, we've seen more and more of our groundwater monitoring network that we have around the state. More and more of those wells are going from being in the sort of above normal and normal classes down to the below normal classes. And so this is going to be a challenge, and we certainly are hearing from people around the state that the groundwater resources are very much challenged right now. And we'll continue to track this. but what we're seeing is some declining levels. This kind of maps that. What you see is the red are and the oranges are those the below normal situations, and you can see these very dry periods in 2016, 2017, 2020 into 21, and then now into 2025. As we head into here, we have all of this below normal well levels, and so this is, you know, this sort of tracking, and this tracks along with what we've seen from previous droughts. And this just gives a snapshot of some of those wells where you see, I want to just maybe point out Campton. Campton, this well here, this letter C, what we see here is it never really truly recovered from the last drought. Remember that we had droughts conditions that existed in the North Country really until last spring, when, if you might recall, we had like 14 weekends in a row that we had rain. So this, but you can see that this well in Campton, even though it did pop up in the middle of that period, never really totally recovered. And so what we're still seeing in some of the North Country is deficits from previous years in our groundwater. And that's, I think that does not bode well for what that's going to look like over this winter and into next spring. So, you know, these are some of the challenges that we want to make sure people are aware of, and why we brought this call together. And thank you to HSEM for doing that, because this is kind of the setting up that we may have more challenges to come. Drinking water, we have about 200,000 people around the state right now that are affected by outdoor water use restrictions. Not as much a big deal this time of year as it would be in the middle of summer, unless, of course, you're trying to do some landscaping or something like that, buttoning up sites. So definitely a lot of folks that are facing some of those challenges. Right now, the public water systems are hanging in there. We don't have any major impacts to report on that. One of the things I want to point out is that we are hearing from lots and lots of private wells, especially dug wells, that is shallow wells, that we're hearing from well drillers that there's a lot of problems, that they're responding to a lot of people who are out of water. I've just heard anecdotally from folks, you know, just about trying to get somebody in to deepen wells. They're very busy trying to correct some of those situations. But one thing that we have launched, it's on our website, and there'll be links from this presentation, is our dry well report. So if you have a dry well, or if it's a well driller that has that knows of some, we have a place for people to report. We're going to try to keep track of this so that we understand a little bit better about what's going on around the state. And if there are ever resources available, we could try to make those available. And there's a lot of guidance for people who are on wells. That's on our Drought website, and a lot of fact sheets, and just trying to make sure that we're trying to be safe while people are doing this. We have heard there was a Giardia outbreak at a roadside spring. Just so that people are aware, roadside springs are not safe water, and that you definitely should, you know, be boiling that water if you're using it, and you should not be drinking that. And there may be some emergency sources, and that's what I want to just talk about for a second. There are 100 towns in the state that either have a town-owned community water system or a town building that has been classified as a public water system. These are places that are generally safe to get water. So it could be your town hall, fire station, but you want to make sure that those are actually safe places to get water and to serve water. So, and we certainly, the staff at DES is available to answer any questions about this, but to be able to make those resources available could be very important over the next few months. And we have some tips about how to do that. Generally, a faucet and an exterior tap, and also making sure that that tap gets sanitized and sampled. And again, we're absolutely we'll help anybody try to understand what's needed by that and where to find labs and all that other sort of thing, if people would like to know more about that. Finally, our websites, there's a ton of information. We have our drought updates that come out at least monthly, sometimes more. We have our dry well report form. We have water use restrictions lists, contacts lists. There's a link to the New Hampshire Drought Management Plan, which is an annex to the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, and lots of other resources for you to take in. Also, for non-well related impacts, if people are identifying them, the NOAA has a website that you can go to, and this is also really helpful, again, for both the federal and state government to understand kind of what those impacts are looking like. And so this is a really easy to use tool. You can go in. This is really good citizen science where you can add in your site and the impacts that you're feeling in your particular property or your business. And you can enter those into this website, and this is helpful for future planning and also to understand kind of what's the magnitude of things that are going on, because we only know what we can hear. I would also just point out for those state agencies and federal agencies that this has a very nice reporting tool. So you can identify time periods, parts of the state. You can do those, and it will give you a nice report of the various different impacts that people have reported. So trying to get that out there for people to use. We're going to come back to this. I'm going to just talk very briefly about this messaging. This is the messaging we've been using now for the last few weeks. And it's been, I think, somewhat effective. We're getting a lot of media coverage. And I think that we're seeing these particular messages getting out to the world and I think in a good way. So we'll come back to this at the end because I'd like to get any input on what other messaging should we be doing, and also hear from other people about what impacts you're seeing around the state. Again, just to really quickly summarize, as Mary suggested, this drought is severe and it's likely to continue into the winter months, especially in some parts of the state. Be kind to your well. I think that's a really important message for everybody to get out there. We can all implement conservation practices in our own properties, and please listen to your water supplier. We'll hear more about this, but certainly fire danger is high and there's a statewide ban. You know, the farmers are working extra hard to try to bring in the harvest and making sure that livestock are fed and watered. So support your local agriculture. This sort of beware filling wells with bulk water deliveries. That's not a recommended practice. It'll be gone very quickly, especially if you have a dug well, and may not be safe. And definitely water from roadside springs is not safe to drink straight up. We'd love for people to be reporting. And again, in this point of if you have a boat or a seasonal dock that needs water to get out of the lake, you probably ought to do that soon. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back over to the good folks at HSEM to help to facilitate a conversation about what other folks are hearing. So I'll turn it back to you, Director, and then for that conversation. Thank you.
Yep, I appreciate that. Very, very good information, Ted. Thank you. I'm actually going to have Rachel Lang come on the call and facilitate the conversation. Due to the size of the call, folks, we're going to have to ask you to raise your hand, or if you're on I believe everybody's actually signed in. So raise your hand and we will come unmute you to make sure you can facilitate the conversation and go from there. So this is an opportunity for other members of the drought management team to facilitate conversation amongst the team and with Ted directly. So Rachel, the call is yours.
Thank you, Director. As you said, if you have a question, you can go ahead and select the raise your hand icon or use the meeting chat. And we do ask that before asking your question, if you could just state your name and agency or group. And Ted, I'm not sure if you saw, there is a question in the chat about funding through the Residential Well Financial Assistance Program.
Yes, I'll go ahead and answer that since that's right out there. The answer is that we do not have funding at this moment. That program ended with the funding sources that it had, and we are currently, pondering whether or not we can find some additional funding sources for that program.
Great, thank you, Ted. Steve Sherman, looks like you have your hand raised. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, good morning. Just wanted to give a quick brief out on the wildfire conditions. So we did see a large increase in August for wildfires, and that did continue to a lesser extent, but it did continue into this month. The rain last week definitely helped, but we're right back into drying conditions. So we're going to probably see that fire activity pick up again later this week and into the weekend. With that, we are coordinating with our federal partners as well as other states and provinces around the area. The U.S. Forest Service has brought in a Type 1 helicopter, which is a large helicopter. It can carry 2,500 gallons of water or pick up 2,500 gallons of water. So the last time we had a resource like that in the state was 1995 with the conditions back then. We also worked with the governor's office, and there is a proclamation in place where there is no burning allowed statewide. The only places that can have any fires are campgrounds, and these are private and public campgrounds that actually meet the definition of a campground, and they have a fire permit in place and inspections by the fire wardens. So no backyard fires, no other fires allowed within the state. As you heard, the conditions are going to continue, so that ban will continue into October, probably at least until the middle of October, depending on if conditions change. We also met New Hampshire Homeland Security folks. Myself met with the U.S. Forest Service as well as FEMA to just make sure everything's in place if we do have a large fire or multiple large fires with impacts to citizens of the state, that we can have everything in place to look at the federal financial assistance that's out there. And that's all I have. So end of report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chief Sherman. At this time, I am not seeing any additional questions. Go ahead, Director.
Ted, can we just talk about messaging for a quick minute? I think that if my understanding of the flow correctly, DES will put messaging out, and the leverage is really for the members of the drought management team to grab that and share that on their own platforms to leverage that and get that out as much as possible. Is that where we're headed at this point?
I think that's what we're hoping. Thank you, Director. That indeed, we continue to do messaging, but everybody, our various different constituencies get their news, get their information from various different sources. So we certainly would love some input on this. I know that because it was a D3 declaration, that opens up certain loan programs from Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture. So, if there's other things like that you know of from your particular agencies that we can share and that we can get out to people out in the world so that they have an understanding of what resources are out there and how to access them, that would be great. Otherwise, I think we'll continue to follow what's going on, and as conditions change, we can adapt the messaging to do that. But I certainly would love any additional help either today on the call, or feel free to send me something afterwards, or send something through Director Buxton that can help us to better clarify that messaging for things that are going to work with folks. So I would love to hear if anybody wants to throw anything in the chat, or if anybody has any ideas either now or in the next weeks. Please just send them along so that we can continue to let people know what's going on. So I guess at this point, if there's other questions from other folks, I think we could probably handle that. Is that okay, Director?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to ask if you wanted to open up to general questions and questions from the media who may be on the call. I could ask Rachel
Absolutely.
to do that. So
That
Rachel,
would be
can you
great if
please
Rachel could do that.
Yeah, great. Rachel, the call's yours.
Great, thank you, Director. Once again, if you are in the Teams app, you can select the raise your hand icon and we can go through and unmute you. If you are joining the call over the phone, it is *5 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. And once again, we do ask that before asking your questions, if you could just state your name and agency or group.
Rachel, it looks like we have a question in the chat for Commissioner Jasper, if he's willing to take that.
Oh, I do see that. Commissioner Jasper, are you able to answer that question?
He may have dropped from the call.
Okay, we will try to get an answer for you and reach back out with that information.
He was unable to mute himself. I just gave him permissions to unmute himself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're really not hearing a lot from farmers directly. I know it's been a challenge for people with hay. The drought has affected early drops from apples, but it's just from a few farms here and there that we're hearing. I think that probably Cooperative Extension probably has a better handle on that than we do here, because we really don't collect data.
Thank you, Rach.
It does look like there is another question in the chat that you might be able to answer, Commissioner, about access to funding, possibly for the.
So yes, there is funding available, but they're low interest loans from Farm Service Agency, from USDA, and that's probably the last thing that most people want to do right now, is take on more debt. But there is no actual relief in terms of just grant programs at the moment.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. It does look like, Jeremy, you have your hand raised. You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, hello, everyone. It's actually more of a comment. Jeremy Delisle, UNH Cooperative Extension. Just following up on the commissioner's comment, as far as us being out on farms, we are doing that regularly. I also have my colleague Carl Mafsky on this call that can speak from more of a pasture forage perspective. But visiting vegetable and fruit farms, growers are certainly very concerned. We've gotten through a good part of the season, especially with fruiting crops, many of our vegetables. What we're seeing now is crops like, especially late corn, kind of struggle to size up. That's been a challenge in many locations. The water sources that are there and available on farms, this is a conversation we're having continually with farms now, is how can we expand existing water sources, or diversify to create new water sources on those farms, or deliver that water as efficiently as possible through drip irrigation or soil health practices that help retain soil moisture, hold on to as much of that as we possibly can. So, and our growers have been doing that for many years. So they've prepared, but we can only prepare to a certain extent. And at some point, the drought catches up with us. So certainly seeing drought impact apples, as Commissioner said, early drops of apples. But overall, they're making the best of it and trying to make every drop that they can count and allocate that to the crops that need it most at this point in the season, with apples and late vegetables, winter squashes, things like that, probably taking the top of the list. I don't know, Carl may have more to add there. It looks like he has his hand up, so I'll hush and hand things back over.
Thank you. And I did give you, Carl, you should have the ability to unmute yourself if you want to go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Karl Majewski, field specialist with UNH Extension, based over in Cheshire County. And just to add to what Jeremy had said, I work a lot with dairy and livestock producers, particularly with field crop production for dairy and livestock feed. And those main crops would be field corn harvested as silage, and then your forage crops, so grass, alfalfa, including pastures. Field corn is variable. There are some areas that are seeing some severe losses. I was speaking with a colleague who was measuring some yields up in Coos County, where there was a field that was yielding less than half of what it typically does with field corn. Other places are doing okay. No one's getting record yields, but at least yield wise, it's looking okay. The question that remains is what the quality is like, whether it's, got the ear development that's going to provide the energy that's going to make for good feed. Forage crops, on the other hand, so grasses in particular, are suffering statewide. Growth in pastures and hayfields has pretty much severely been held back since July. That's kind of a 1-2 punch because there were a lot of farms that were dealing with delayed harvest because of all that rain that we got in May and June, where there was lots of grass, but the field was far too wet to actually harvest it. By the time they were able to get it, the quality had gone, so they were able to harvest hay, but it was not really high in nutritive value at all. Since then, I've heard multiple reports of farms that have been supplementing their pastures with stored feed that they would have liked to wait until, say, later in the fall to start feeding out. But here they've started to feed it out back at the beginning of August. So, there are some farms, larger farms, that have maybe a more diversified cropping system that will likely be able to do okay. There's a lot of smaller farms that are going to be in a tougher situation, that they're going to be increasing the amount of feed that they're looking to purchase. With that increased demand and that lower supply, they're looking at facing some higher prices. So we're working with them to do what we can, but we're still kind of waiting to see how it all shakes out.
Great. Thank you, Carl. And I appreciate your patience, Marco. If you want to go ahead, you should be able to ask your question. Well, it looks like you are still muted, Marco. All right, let me see. You should have the ability to click the microphone icon and it should unmute. Otherwise, if you wanted to go ahead and put your comment or question in the chat. Oh, and I do see a hand raised from Jeffrey. You should have the ability to unmute yourself if you want to go ahead.
Yes, good morning. It's Jeff Holmes, Executive Director of the Farm Service Agency. I can comment on some of the questions about wells and perhaps crop losses and programs that the Farm Service Agency has. With regard to wells, we've got 6 counties that are been rated at D3 on the drought monitor, and we can definitely assist some certain operations like livestock or vineyards and orchards that are supplied directly from a well. If they've failed and were adequate pre-drought, they can possibly get some assistance there. And we've got 3 counties that have been D3 for 3 weeks and potentially 4 with the monitor on Thursday. And we get each week adds a little enhancement to some of our forage programs. Of grazing operations have run out of feed, potentially get some payments for reported acreage, and potentially there's help for hauling water or feed for livestock, or even transporting livestock to better pasture conditions. We'll put maybe a link in the chat on how to access your local service centers, and any losses out there. We definitely encourage operations to let us know what you're dealing with, and we can tailor assistance depending on the drought monitor rating in your county or your other reported acreages. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Director. It does look like there is a question in the chat from Dave Pierce from the Union Leader asking about apple growers doing in terms of meeting local and regional wholesale demands in this drought. And do we have any data that shows a shortage of supply and revenue? If anyone on this call feels they are capable in answering that question. Jeremy, you should be able to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've been out on apple farms this week. I was on 5 farms yesterday. I don't think we're going to have a shortage. I think that there's enough fruit to go around. Growers have done a really good job. As I was saying, they've kept the water that they had available to the trees up to this point in the season. And I think for a lot of them, the rain that we got last week really did help. It was kind of just in the nick of time, and they saw substantial fruit sizing, just from that. Some folks got anywhere from 1.5 inches, I believe, up to closer to 2 inches or so in some parts of the state. And so that really helped a lot. And so I think the short answer to your question is no, I don't think that there will be shortages. That we've made it through this part of the season. I think now what would be most helpful is some rainfall to minimize stress going into the winter on those trees, so that they can just rest and recover and be able to produce a good crop for next season. So hope that helps.
Great, thank you for that information, Jeremy. It does look like Marco was able to put his comment in the chat about water utilities have been messaging and have been acting accordingly. There is a question from Concord Monitor, David Brooks. Are you hearing any concern from ski areas worried about snowmaking ponds being too low? Is there anything they can do aside from hoping?
I'm not sure if we have anyone from Ski New Hampshire on the call today, but we definitely are in contact with them and will be having those kinds of conversations. But to date, I've not heard anything specifically from any particular ski area that there was a problem that they know of. But like I said, I think we are going to be certainly reaching out and having some conversations.
Rachel, are we through all the questions at this point? Okay, I don't see any outstanding questions at this point. And Ted, I'm going to turn the call to you so you can close this out.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We'll continue to message around the kind of those key messages that we talked about, and always open for additional questions, and may end up reaching out to you all if there's questions that we can't answer about the particular areas of your expertise. So I appreciate your interest, and again, if you have additional ideas on ways that we should be messaging or impacts that we haven't yet talked about, please feel free to reach out to me, ted.deers@des.nh.gov, and let me know what you're thinking. So thanks, everybody, and have a really great day. And while the drought is horrible, you can't beat the weather. I mean, it's kind of amazing. So get out there and enjoy it. Thanks, everybody.